She said, "Yes, Lord, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Amen. Thank you so much for your invitation to be with you today. I'm really excited to meet you. I was here many years ago on a weekend when I was a student at Kalamazoo College. Came up for some time in Saugatuck. That was a long time ago. I didn't have all this gray hair then. I've been friends with Father Jay longer than you all have known him. And we're trying to figure out just how long that's been. We've had a long and lovely history together. I'm so excited to be here in this place with you. My work with TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, brings me all over the country, and I get to worship and preach and teach and talk about faithful stewardship with congregations like yours all over the place. Everyone is unique and different, and I love that about our church. There's a moment in today's gospel, I suspect, that makes every preacher a little nervous. Jesus has left Galilee and has gone into the region of Tyre and Sidon. To set the geographic stage for us, this is northwest of Galilee. It's on the coast. Jesus is far out of the territory of faithful Israel and deep in the lands of Baal-worshiping Canaan. To a Jew, this is enemy territory. Its inhabitants are outside the fold and looked on with contempt by those from Galilee or Judea. While there, a Canaanite woman comes to him crying out, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." And Jesus ignores her. Not a word. She keeps calling after them, and finally the disciples have had enough. Send her away. She keeps shouting after us. This is not the disciples at their pastoral best. But then Jesus speaks. And what he says does not make the story any easier for us to hear. "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." The woman comes closer. She kneels before him. "Lord, help me." And what does the Son of God do? He doubles down on his contempt. He mansplains inequality to her. It's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. But this woman does not leave. She does not lash out. She does not argue that children should lose their bread. Instead, she says something extraordinary. "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Yes, yet. Small words that do big work in this context. She takes the world Jesus has described, a table, children, bread, boundaries, and she sees something larger than anyone else seems to see. She does not ask anyone to leave the table to make room for her. She simply believes the table is bigger than they think. And there is something extraordinary about who teaches us this lesson. She has no power, no authority, no place among the disciples. Jews think this woman is outside of the fold of God. And here she is, talking to the Son of God. Her love for her daughter, her astonishing confidence in the mercy of God will not let her walk away. She keeps insisting that the table must be wider. And in this encounter, the horizon of the story widens with her. The mercy that seemed guarded by and for the lost sheep of Israel begins reaching toward the nations, toward the Gentiles, toward the rest of the world, and toward eventually people like us. And I think perhaps that's why this story matters so much when we gather around this table. Most of us are here, all of us are here, Because generations ago, the gospel crossed a boundary. The circle widened. Someone carried the good news beyond the people who first heard it. We are not simply the people generous enough to make room for others at God's table. We are the others for whom room was made. The Canaanite woman's existence becomes our invitation. Come closer. There is bread enough, mercy enough, a place for you here. And suddenly this story becomes a story about abundance. Because the Canaanite woman believes that the mercy of God is so plentiful that even what falls from the table is enough. Enough to heal, enough to restore, enough to save her daughter. She refuses to believe that grace must be rationed. And I wonder whether that might be one of the deepest lessons the church has to learn about stewardship. Because when we hear that word, we often begin with a question of allocation. How much do we have? How much do we need? How much can we afford to give it away? As if the gospel doesn't suggest we should give it all away. How much should we save? How much is enough? Those are good questions, necessary. Every household asks them in our budgeting. Every vestry asks them. But beneath all of those questions is another, more fundamental question. Do we believe we live in a world of scarcity or a world shaped by the abundance of God? That difference matters. Scarcity teaches us to protect what's ours. Scarcity teaches us to decide who belongs before we decide what we will share. Scarcity teaches us to draw the circle tightly because there's only so much bread, and we had better make certain that it reaches the right people. This woman has another theology. She believes there is enough mercy, enough healing, enough grace, enough God. And if we look at the other readings this morning, we discover she's not alone. This story has been with us since our earliest prophetic days. Isaiah hears God say that the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord will be welcomed because my house shall be a house of prayer for all people, not some, not a few. The psalmist sings, "Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you," imagining the blessing of God extending outward to every nation. And Paul tells the Romans, those gifts you have received, the calling of God to you is irrevocable. Irrevocable. No one can take it from you. The circle keeps getting wider. The blessing keeps moving outward. The table keeps getting longer. And then this Canaanite woman appears in Matthew's gospel, standing at the very edge of the circle, saying, "Surely there is enough mercy here for me too." There's another detail here that I don't want us to miss. When the woman first calls out and the disciples say, "Send her away," her suffering has become an interruption. She's noisy. She's persistent. She's interfering with whatever they thought Jesus ought to be doing. And I think this is one of the great dangers in the life of the church. Sometimes we become so busy doing ministry that we stop noticing the people whom God has actually placed in front of us. We have plans, programs, calendars, budgets. We love a good committee meeting. And then someone begins shouting at the edge of our hearing. Someone whose need is inconvenient. Someone whose story does not fit the ministry model that we designed in one of those committees. Someone who was not on the agenda, who did not submit their materials on time, who didn't follow our rules. And the temptation is always there. Send her away. But stewardship begins with attention. Before stewardship is about treasure, it's about noticing. What has God placed in our care? Who has God placed in our path? Whose voice have we learned not to hear? What gifts are already present here in our community? And perhaps most importantly, who might have something to teach us? Because notice what happens in the story. The Canaanite woman is not simply the recipient of Jesus' ministry, she becomes a participant in it. She speaks. Jesus listens. Something changes. Christians have spent centuries trying to explain this passage in ways that make them less uncomfortable. Perhaps Jesus was testing her. Imagine that. Perhaps Jesus knew exactly what he was doing. God knows everything, after all. Perhaps the disciples were the real audience, and this was a performance for the narrative. I wonder, though, do we lose something beautiful when we work too hard to protect Jesus from the possibility of genuine encounter? The mystery of the incarnation is that Jesus truly entered human life. He ate and drank and grieved. He was tired. He formed relationships. He asked questions. According to today's story, he got it wrong sometimes. And in this encounter, a woman standing outside the accepted boundaries of his mission speaks a truth about God's mercy, and Jesus receives it. The most human action of all, Jesus changes. Woman, great is your faith, and her daughter is healed. There's something profoundly generous about being willing to listen deeply enough that another person can enlarge our understanding. We live in a culture that treats changing our minds as failure. We're rewarded for our certainty, for defending our position arduously, for refusing to give an inch. But what if there's another kind of faithfulness? What if sometimes the holy thing is to say, I'd not seen that before. You've shown me something new. The circle needs to be wider than I was drawing it. Sometimes the thing that God asks us to give up is not our time, talent, and treasure. Sometimes it's our certainty. It's our assumption that we already know who belongs. It's our conviction that generosity can only happen on our terms. And that is where this becomes very much a stewardship story. Because stewardship is not just simply the practice of giving away some portion of what we possess. It's the spiritual discipline of recognizing that none of it was ours to begin with. It wasn't our money, our time, our building, our relationships, our talents, our traditions, our churches, even the grace we have received. All of it is gift. And gifts from God are not meant to simply stop with us. We are blessed so that blessing can move through us. That's the vision Isaiah offers. That's the vision of Psalm 67, where we bless all peoples. And that's what Paul says is irrevocable. This is the question that the gospel places before every Christian community. Who else might be needing to be blessed through what has been entrusted to us? Who is standing just beyond the table? Who's calling from the edge of our hearing? Who might be waiting for us to discover that the grace we have received was never meant to be guarded? The answer is not simply that we need to be more generous. The gospel asks of us something even deeper. It asks us to be people who trust abundance, people who believe that extending mercy does not diminish mercy, that somebody else's belonging does not threaten our own, that somebody else's rightness doesn't make us wrong, that sharing what we have does not make God poorer, that widening the table does not mean there will be less bread. The Canaanite woman understood this. Her faith is great because she sees the abundance of God even when everyone around her seems to be thinking in terms of limits. She does not ask anyone to leave the table. She simply believes the table is bigger than they think. Put up another chair. Extend the circle wider. Include more people. And that's the invitation for us today, to look again at the table that God has placed in front of us, to look at everything we have been given, our time, our resources, our community, our faith, our very lives, and ask not only how much of it can I afford to give, to share, but how might God's blessing travel through me? How much wider could the table become? Whom have I assumed was outside the faith, outside the reach of what God has entrusted to me? Because if this woman is right, and Jesus tells us that she is, then there is more than enough. Enough mercy, enough grace, enough healing, enough belonging, enough love, enough God. I love the hymn that we sang at the gospel. One of my favorites. In the third verse particularly, for the love of God is broader than the measure of the mind. And the heart of the eternal is most wonderfully kind. If our love were but more faithful, we should take him at his word, and our life would be thanksgiving for the goodness of the Lord. That's the work of stewardship, to believe that we have enough, that learning to live as we actually believe in abundance. She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Amen.